The number of cases rising, more than 1,700 cases. And authorities say the real number is likely vastly higher because of a lack of testing. At least 8 states now canceling school, more than 15 million students at home. And 24 hours after Dr. Anthony Fauci acknowledged when it comes to testing in this country that, quote, it's a failing, the president tonight is asked, does he take responsibility? What he now says. And with this national emergency declared, what does that now mean? Where there will soon be drive-through testing, CVS, Walmart, Target, what we've learned tonight. Also tonight, after the president was photographed just days ago with a Brazilian official on the right there, that official testing positive, the president is asked, will he test himself? How he answers. And after another function, word coming in tonight, Ivanka Trump is now staying home out of an abundance of caution. Store shelves across this country empty tonight. Disney World, Disneyland, Universal Studios, theme parks, all closed. The Masters now suspended. The Boston Marathon postponed. It all follows the NBA, the NHL, the NCAA tournament called off. And tonight, news coming in from Tom Hanks and his wife, Rita Wilson, after testing positive. Overseas tonight, the race to get home. Americans trying to catch final flights before that midnight deadline for the president's 30-day travel ban from Europe. But the president says it will not affect Americans. The new toll from Italy tonight. And to the north in Canada this evening, word from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after his wife tests positive. And Dr. Jen Ashton, and your questions tonight, when should you get tested and how? Why are we so behind? And what if you have underlying health conditions?
This is ABC World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here. We have just about made it through another week together, but on this Friday night, there are major new developments involving the coronavirus. Tonight, President Trump has declared a national emergency. This is the proclamation sent out by the White House, and he said he did this to, quote, unleash the full power of the federal government, unlocking $50 billion now to help states and communities fight the spread of this virus and to help test and treat Americans. Tonight, there are more than 1,600 cases in at least 47 states and Washington, D.C. But we also know that number is likely far higher because of the lack of testing in this country. The death toll now rising to at least 47. And from the first case identified on January 21st, look at how sharply there the number of cases in the U.S. has gone up just in recent days. Outside New York City tonight, a drive-through testing site has now been set up in that community, essentially on lockdown. The National Guard is now there in New Rochelle. But what about testing and drive-thrus elsewhere in this country? News tonight from the president that CVS, Target, and Walmart will soon be offering drive-through testing in some locations across the U.S. So how will this work? And the president was asked late today, does he take responsibility for the lack of testing so far? Health officials saying we lost valuable weeks testing Americans and tracking where the virus was spreading most in this country. And so we begin tonight with ABC's chief national affairs correspondent, Tom Llamas.
Tonight, after weeks of warnings and repeatedly downplaying the crisis, the president taking sweeping action, unveiling his plan to combat and defeat the coronavirus.
To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency.
The president says he will send states $50 billion in aid funding, waiving provisions to allow doctors to treat patients remotely, and working with the private sector, including Google, to set up drive-through testing facilities in the parking lots of places like Walmart and Target.
This will start very quickly, and we'll have the ability to do in the millions over a very, very quick period of time.
The surging demand for tests overwhelming healthcare professionals and leaving sick Americans with no answers. Just yesterday, the nation's top infection specialist, Dr. Anthony Fauci, saying this of the testing breakdown.
It is a failing. I mean, let's admit it.
The lag in testing means the government can't predict how severe the crisis will get or how long it will last.
It's unpredictable, but if you look at historically how these things work, it'll likely be anywhere from a few weeks to up to 8 weeks.
Hospitals across the country are staffing labs around the clock to ramp up testing to meet the need. The president's new plan aimed at helping doctors facing test shortages on the front lines of this pandemic.
I have done 0 tests in my office for COVID-19. This isn't due for lack of suspicion. It is completely due to lack of testing.
We're in a race now. We're trying to race ahead and get the testing capacity ahead. And what this testing allows us to do is to, sort of isolate the exposure from person to person of this virus spreading so that we can slow it down.
Health officials in hard-hit Washington state reporting they have the test kits, but doctors are running out of protective gear to collect samples.
The state desperately needs N95 masks, gowns, and gloves brought into the community. I think there is some indication that we'll get some, and I just don't think it's going to be enough fast enough.
In Seattle, Fahim Jamali says she's been homesick for a week, visiting a doctor, even the ER, but she hasn't been tested.
I'm worried if I have a coronavirus. I'm just getting worse and worse.
In that containment zone north of New York City today, the first drive-through testing site on the East Coast. The Empire State now with the most known cases in the country.
My guess is there are thousands and thousands of cases walking around the state of New York. There could be tens of thousands of people.
Tonight, at least 8 states have closed schools statewide, along with some of the biggest cities in the country, including Los Angeles. Across America, almost 22,000 schools shuttered, forcing 15 million kids to stay home.
We've already seen National Guard deployed.
Tom Llamas back with us here in New York tonight. And Tom, it was really something to see that mother in Seattle so frustrated trying to get help as her condition deteriorates. Back to these drive-thrus that the president talked about late today. How will this work and who will actually be able to get tested?
That's right, David. There are a lot of questions tonight. The way the president explained it, there's going to be a website created where people can check their symptoms through a series of questions. And then, if needed, they'll be directed to the nearest drive-through location. People can just drive up. They won't have to get out of their cars. A healthcare professional will take a swab, typically orally, and then they'll get the results in a few days. Now, the goal here will reduce the spread of coronavirus, but also meet the rising demand because of this virus and because it's spreading so fast. The big question tonight, though, David, when is this all going to be up and running? David? You can still see a number of people out and about behind you in Times Square, but we do spot that mask over your shoulder. People are concerned about this, Tom. Thank you. And to the major disruptions across this country tonight. More signs of the world's biggest economy actually shutting down children home from school. Now, 8 states, as I mentioned, canceling school in their states. Empty shelves across this country at grocery stores, and more major sporting events have now been canceled. And word coming in tonight from actor Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson. ABC's Matt Gutman now with the images from across this country.
Tonight, more signs of the world's biggest economy creaking to a halt. Disney today canceling the production of all live-action films in the pipeline. Hours later, Netflix, then Warner Brothers following suit, halting productions in the U.S. and Canada. Universal and Disney also shutting their theme parks. The U.S. entertainment industry is valued at an estimated $700 billion a year, and the shutdowns are engulfing sports, too. NASCAR and Golf's Masters announced postponements today, joining nearly every major league sport, the NHL, Major League Baseball, and soccer, and others calling a timeout, including the NBA. The Utah Jazz's Rudy Gobert, who tested positive after mockingly touching reporters' microphones at a news conference, apologized, but his team is now testing dozens of people. The Boston Marathon pushing the race to September, and the ripples reaching down into local economies, too. In hard-hit Washington state, overall business is down 10%. The state hammered with over 30 coronavirus deaths. Hotel spending down more than 50%. Restaurants down 30%. The ever-present threat of quarantine triggering panic buying. Now, these shelves are bare. Typically, they're restocked every night. But economists tell us with the global supply chain screeching to a halt, shelves like this might just stay bare.
Farmers aren't going to be able to get their work done. Truckers aren't going to be able to ship the food from the farm to the store shelves. Store shelves aren't going to get stocked. It's going to be difficult to just manage through every day.
Nick Vyas is an expert on the global supply chain.
So would you say that this is the biggest economic interruption that we have seen in our lifetimes?
I think when the dust settles, we will look back and this will probably be one of the major catastrophic event.
But economists seem to agree there will be a recovery, a distant hope brought nearer by the latest Instagram update from Hollywood's most relatable man, Tom Hanks, still in isolation after contracting the virus in Australia. Hanks encouraging fans to take the advice of experts and take care of themselves, and in a wink to his hit movie A League of Their Own, reminding folks there's no crying in baseball.
That from Tom Hanks today. Matt Gutman joins us live tonight. And Matt, we wanted to get back to that graphic you and I showed earlier this week that really drove home why officials are trying to slow this down, why the president declared a national emergency today. Many health officials say the U.S. needs to do everything it can to flatten the curve, as they say. You see the dotted line there across the middle. That's what hospitals can handle. And if we don't slow it down, the red there shows the need spiking well above what hospitals can actually handle. The thought being if we slow it down, perhaps we'll be able to keep it within what our healthcare community can actually handle. But Matt, I wanted to ask you tonight if there's a run on supplies, because people have seen those empty store shelves across this country. If there's a disruption in the supply chain, are there things governments can do to actually help?
And we're already starting to see some of those actions, David. The federal government and state officials tell me that these are already happening. National Guard deployed in New York. The governor of California issuing an executive order essentially allowing him to commandeer private property. And federal officials tell me that it's in their pandemic plan to deploy the military to prevent the supply chain and infrastructure from being interrupted. David.
Matt Gutman in California tonight. Matt, thank you. And the wild week in the financial markets ended with a recovery today, a day after the worst point loss ever. The Dow closing up more than 2,300 points today, a return of 10%, gaining back nearly all of that loss. The back and forth continues. Economists say expect this volatility to continue. Tonight, the World Health Organization says the epicenter of this global pandemic has now shifted from China to Europe. Italy alone just today reporting another 250 deaths in just the past 24 hours. And at midnight tonight, that new travel ban from Europe to the U.S. goes into effect. Americans racing to get home amid confusion. The White House trying to make it clear now that the ban will not affect Americans, but many said that clarification did little to ease the alarm. ABC's Maggie Rulli from London tonight.
Tonight, Americans racing to get home before new travel restrictions on Europe kick in at midnight.
Many Americans are getting on this train to Heathrow, trying to catch what they think could be some of the last flights back to the U.S.
President Trump this afternoon announcing new rules for those coming back.
Citizens, permanent residents, and our families, any of the families returning from Europe will be subject to extra screening as well as self-isolation for a period of 14 days.
But many travelers were left bewildered by the president's initial announcement Wednesday, which didn't immediately say Americans are exempt from the ban.
Did it take you a while to figure out what the rules were?
Yeah, it's very confusing. It still is. There seems to be, if you go to one site for like the White House or the Department of State or Homeland Security, it seems like they're conflicting information.
And it can be expensive. One family says they spent $8,000 for 3 one-way tickets.
You can argue about money later, but I feel like they were putting a price tag on people's safety, and that's scary, especially for people who can't afford it.
Das war ein grotesker Auftritt.
Tonight, one top German official calling the travel ban, quote, grotesque. The exodus from Europe comes as Italy begins a military airlift of patients after its deadliest day of the outbreak, 250 fatalities in 24 hours. In the United Kingdom, the number of cases soaring to nearly 800, and officials say they fear the real number may actually be 10 to 20 times higher. The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, announcing he will self-quarantine for 14 days after his wife tested positive for the virus after a recent trip to Britain.
I want to be clear. I have no symptoms, and I'm feeling good. Of course, it's an inconvenience and somewhat frustrating.
His wife, Sophie, thanking well-wishers, saying she'll be back on her feet soon. But tonight, the virus casting an even wider shadow across Europe. The Eiffel Tower and the Louvre closed until further notice.
David, here in the UK, more than 200 new cases have been reported in just the last 24 hours. Just a few moments ago, President Trump said that he's looking at these new numbers and he may add the UK and potentially other nations to that list of banned countries. David.
All right, Maggie Rulli tonight. Maggie, thank you. Back here at home, President Trump, meantime, was asked late today, will he be tested for coronavirus? After this image from Mar-a-Lago just days ago, the president was with Brazilian officials, one of whom, on the right there with the hat on, tested positive for coronavirus. ABC's Terry Moran tonight with how the president answered.
In the Rose Garden, the president was quick to take credit for some of his administration's efforts on the coronavirus challenge. But when it came to all the problems with testing...
I don't take responsibility at all because we were given a set of circumstances and we were given rules, regulations, and specifications from a different time.
And the president was asked why his administration disbanded the National Security Office set up to prepare for pandemics.
When you say me, I didn't do it. We have a group of people. I could ask perhaps my administration, but I could perhaps ask Tony about that, because I don't know anything about it. I mean, you say we did that. I don't know anything about it.
And what about the president's personal exposure to the virus? He's pictured here in Mar-a-Lago last weekend with a Brazilian official who's since tested positive. But the president has not been tested, nor has he isolated himself.
Are you planning to take any kind of precautionary measure to protect you and also your staff who was there with him?
We have no symptoms whatsoever.
Reporters kept pushing him, noting that other politicians who were at that same Mar-a-Lago event have quarantined themselves.
Well, I don't know that I had exposure, but I don't have any of the symptoms.
But there's no doubt the president was exposed. You can see it right there in the photo of him standing next to the infected Brazilian official.
I have no idea who he is, but I take pictures and it lasts for literally seconds. I don't know the gentleman that we're talking about. I have no idea who he is.
The president's daughter and top advisor Ivanka Trump also had contact this week with an Australian official who has tested positive. Today, she worked from home.
Are you being selfish by not getting tested and potentially
Well, I didn't say I wasn't going to be tested.
Are you going to be?
Most likely, yeah. Most
When do
likely.
you think
Not for
that'll
that reason, but because I think I will do it anyway.
Will you let us know
fairly
the
soon?
results?
We're working on that. We're working out a schedule.
Meanwhile,
thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
President Trump is still shaking hands a lot, contrary to the public health guidance of his own administration and in full view of the American people.
Okay, I like that.
And late today, there is word that a second person who was at the president's Mar-a-Lago resort last weekend has tested positive for coronavirus. This is a donor at a Trump victory fundraiser. Every member of the First Family was at that fundraiser, as were members of the administration. A senior Trump campaign official says this donor who's tested positive has not had any interaction with the president. We've inquired if Mar-a-Lago is going to undergo a deep cleaning, and we're waiting for the answer. David?
All right, Terry, thank you. Meantime, at this hour, Congress now racing to approve a relief plan to help Americans, and there's word tonight of a breakthrough. Let's get right to Mary Bruce on the Hill tonight. Mary?
Well, David, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has just announced that a deal has been reached. This is a bill intended to provide immediate relief. It includes free testing for the coronavirus, enhanced paid sick and family leave, and it would boost unemployment insurance. But it does not include measures that the president has been demanding, like a payroll tax cut. Now, this deal was intensely negotiated between the Speaker and the Treasury Secretary, the two of them speaking more than a dozen times just today. David?
All right, Mary Bruce on the breaking headline from the Hill. Mary, thank you. And there is still much more ahead on World News Tonight this Friday. Dr. Jen Ashton back to answer your questions. When should you get tested and how, and why are we so far behind? And what if you have an underlying health condition? We're also tracking a new line of storms tonight. The other news, the flash flood threat as